Chapter 10. Terrain. We may distinguish 6 kinds of terrain: accessible ground, entangling ground, temporizing ground, narrow passes, precipitous heights, and positions at a great distance from the enemy. Ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible. With regard to ground of this nature, always occupy the raised and sunny spots before the enemy, and carefully guard your line of supplies. Then you will fight with the advantage. Ground that can be easily abandoned but is hard to reoccupy is called entangling. From a position of this sort, if the enemy is unprepared, you may sally forth and defeat him. But if the enemy is prepared for your coming, and you fail to defeat him, then, return being impossible, disaster will ensue. When the position is such that neither side will gain by making the first move, it is called temporizing ground. In a position of this sort, even though the enemy should offer us an attractive bait, it will be advisable not to stir forth, but rather to retreat, thus enticing the enemy in his turn. Then, when part of his army has come out, we may deliver our attack with advantage. With regard to narrow passes, if you can occupy them first, let them be strongly garrisoned and await the advent of the enemy. Should the army forestall you in occupying a pass, do not go after him if the pass is fully garrisoned, unless it is weakly garrisoned. With regard to precipitous heights, if you are beforehand with your adversary, you should occupy the raised and sunny spots, and there wait for him to come up. If the enemy has occupied them before you, do not follow him, but retreat and try to entice him away. If you are situated at a great distance from the enemy, and the strength of the 2 armies is equal, it is not easy to provoke a battle, and if you tire your army by a march to his position, fighting will be to your disadvantage. These 6 are the principles connected with earth. The general who has attained a responsible post must be careful to study them. Now an army is exposed to 6 several calamities, not arising from natural causes, but from faults for which the general is responsible. These are flight, insubordination, collapse, ruin, disorganization, and rout. Other conditions being equal, if one force is hurled against another 10 times its size, the result will be the flight of the former. When the common soldiers are too strong and their officers too weak, the result is insubordination. When the officers are too strong and the common soldiers too weak, the result is collapse. When the higher officers are angry and insubordinate, and on meeting the enemy give battle on their own account from a feeling of resentment, before the commander-in-chief can tell whether or not he is in a position to fight, the result is ruin. When the general is weak and without authority, when his orders are not clear and distinct, when there are no fixed duties assigned to officers and men, and the ranks are formed in a slovenly, haphazard manner, the result is utter disorganization. When a general, unable to estimate the enemy's strength, allows an inferior force to engage a larger one, or hurls a weak detachment against a powerful one, and neglects to place picked soldiers in the front rank, the result must be rout. These are 6 ways of courting defeat, which must be carefully noted by the general who has attained a responsible post. The natural formation of the country is the soldier's best ally, but a power of estimating the adversary, of controlling the forces of victory, and of shrewdly calculating difficulties, dangers, and distances, constitutes the test of a great general. He who knows these things and in fighting puts his knowledge into practice will win his battles. He who knows them not, nor practices them, will surely be defeated. If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight, even at the ruler's bidding. The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom. Regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look upon them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death.
There is a story about the famous general Wu Qi. He wore the same clothes and ate the same food as the meanest of his soldiers, refused to have either a horse to ride or a mat to sleep on, carried his own surplus rations wrapped in a parcel, and shared every hardship with his men. One of his soldiers was suffering from an abscess, and Wu Qi himself sucked out the virus. The soldier's mother, hearing this, began wailing and lamenting. Somebody asked her, saying, "Why do you cry? Your son is only a common soldier, and yet the commander-in-chief himself has sucked the poison from his sore." The woman replied, "Many years ago, Lord Wu performed a similar service for my husband, who never left him afterwards, and finally met his death at the hands of the enemy. And now that he has done the same for my son, he too will fall fighting, I know not where."
If, however, you are indulgent, but unable to make your authority felt, kind-hearted, but unable to enforce your commands, incapable, moreover, of quelling disorder, then your soldiers must be likened to spoiled children. They are useless for any practical purpose.
When Lu Meng was occupying a certain town, he had given stringent orders to his army not to molest the inhabitants or take anything from them by force. Nevertheless, a certain officer serving under his banner, who happened to be a compatriot of his, ventured to appropriate a bamboo hat belonging to one of the people, in order to wear it over his regulation helmet as a protection against the rain. Lu Meng considered that the fact of his being a compatriot should not be allowed to palliate a clear breach of discipline, and accordingly he ordered his summary execution, the tears rolling down his face, however, as he did so. This act of severity filled the army with wholesome awe, and from that time forth even articles dropped in the highway were not picked up.
If we know that our own men are in a condition to attack, but are unaware that the enemy is not open to attack, we have gone only halfway towards victory. If we know that the enemy is open to attack, but are unaware that our own men are not in a condition to attack, we have gone only halfway towards victory. If we know that the enemy is open to attack, and also know that our men are in a condition to attack, but are unaware that the nature of the ground makes fighting impracticable, we have still gone only halfway towards victory. The experienced soldier, once in motion, is never bewildered. Once he has broken camp, he is never at a loss. Hence the saying, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. If you know heaven and know earth, you may make your victory complete." Chapter 11. The 9 Situations. The art of war recognizes 9 varieties of ground: disperse ground, facile ground, contentious ground, open ground, ground of intersecting highways, serious ground, difficult ground, hemmed-in ground, and desperate ground. When a chieftain is fighting in his own territory, it is disperse ground.
So called because the soldiers, being near to their homes and anxious to see their wives and children, are likely to seize the opportunity afforded by a battle and scatter in every direction.
When he has penetrated into hostile territory, but to no great distance, it is facile ground.
This is because of the facility for retreating. When your army has crossed the border, you should burn your boats and bridges, in order to make it clear to everybody that you have no hankering after home.
Ground the possession of which imports great advantage to either side is contentious ground.
This is where the few and the weak can defeat the many and the strong, the neck of a pass.
Ground on which each side has liberty of movement is open ground.
Ground on which intercommunication is easy.
ground which forms the key to 3 contiguous states, so that he who occupies it first has most of the empire at his command, is a ground of intersecting highways.
The possessor of this ground can constrain most neighboring states to become his allies.
When an army has penetrated into the heart of a hostile country, leaving a number of fortified cities in its rear, it is serious ground. The army is in a serious situation. Mountain forests, rugged steeps, marshes and fens, all country that is hard to traverse, this is difficult ground. Ground which is reached through narrow gorges, and from which we can only retire by tortuous paths, so that a small number of the enemy would suffice to crush a large body of our men. This is hemmed-in ground. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay is desperate ground. On disperse ground, fight not. On facile ground, halt not. On contentious ground, attack not. Occupy the advantageous position first. If a position of this kind is secured first by the enemy, beware of attacking him. Lure him away by pretending to flee. Show your banners and sound your drums. Make a dash for other places that he cannot afford to lose. Trail brushwood and raise a dust. Confound his ears and eyes. Detach a body of your best troops and place it secretly in ambuscade. Then your opponent will sally forth to the rescue. On open ground, do not try to block the enemy's way,
because the attempt would be futile and would expose the blocking force itself to serious risks. Draw closer together and see that a portion of your own army is not cut off.
On the ground of intersecting highways, join hands with your allies. On serious ground, gather in plunder.
Here, there being no inducement as yet to advance further, and no possibility of retreat, one ought to take measures for protracted resistance by bringing in provisions from all sides, and keep a close watch on the enemy.
In difficult ground, keep steadily on the march. On hemmed-in ground, resort to stratagem. On desperate ground, fight with all your might.
There is a chance of life, whereas death is certain if you cling to your corner.
Those who were called skillful leaders of old knew how to drive a wedge between the enemy's front and rear to prevent cooperation between his large and small divisions, to hinder the good troops from rescuing the bad, the officers from rallying their men. When the enemy's men were united, they managed to compel them to disorder. When it was to their advantage, they made a forward move. When otherwise, they would remain where they were. If asked how to cope with a great host of the enemy in orderly array and on the point of marching to the attack, I should say, begin by seizing something which your opponent holds dear. Then he will be amenable to your will. Speed is the essence of war. Take advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness. Make your way by unexpected routes and attack unguarded spots. The following are the principles to be observed by an invading force. The further you penetrate into a country, the greater will be the solidarity of your troops, and thus the defenders will not prevail against you. Make forays in fertile country in order to supply your men with food. Carefully study the well-being of your men, and do not overtax them. Concentrate your energy and hoard your strength.
Wang Qian was a famous general whose military genius largely contributed to the success of the first emperor. He had invaded the Chu state, where a universal levy was made to oppose him. But being doubtful of the temper of his troops, he declined all invitations to fight and remained strictly on the defensive. In vain did the Chu general try to force a battle. Day after day, Wang Qian kept inside his walls and would not come out, but devoted his whole time and energy to winning the affection and confidence of his men. He took care that they should be well fed, sharing his own meals with them, provided facilities for bathing, and employed every method of judicious indulgence to weld them into a loyal and homogeneous body. After some time had elapsed, he sent certain persons to find out how the men were amusing themselves. The answer was that they were having contests of weight-throwing and long-jumping. When Wang Qian heard that they were engaged in these athletic pursuits, he knew that their spirits had been strung up to the required pitch, and that they were now ready for fighting. By this time the Chu army, after repeating their challenge again and again, had marched away eastwards in disgust. The Qin general immediately broke up his camp and followed them, and in the battle that ensued they were routed with great slaughter. Shortly afterwards the whole of Chu was conquered, and the king led into captivity.
Keep your enemy continually on the move, and devise unfathomable plans. Let the enemy never know exactly where you are. Throw your soldiers into positions from where there is no escape. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their uttermost strength.
If they are in an awkward place together, they will surely exert their united strength to get out of it.
Soldiers, when in desperate straits, lose the sense of fear. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand firm. If they are in hostile country, they will show a stubborn front. If there is no help for it, they will fight hard. Thus, without waiting to be marshaled, the soldiers whose fate you hold in your hands, without waiting to be asked, will do your will, without restrictions. They will be faithful. Without giving orders, they can be trusted. Prohibit the taking of omens, and do away with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared.
If one man were to run amok with a sword in the marketplace, and everybody else try to get out of his way, I should not say that this man alone had courage, and that all the rest were contemptible cowards. The truth is that a desperado and a man who values his life do not meet on even terms.
If our soldiers are not overburdened with money, it is not because they have a distaste for riches. If their lives are not unduly long, it is not because they are disinclined to longevity.
Wealth and long life are things for which all men have a natural inclination. Hence, if they burn or fling away valuables and sacrifice their own lives, it is not that they dislike them, but simply that they have no choice. It is for the general to see that temptations to shirk fighting and grow rich are not thrown in their way.
On the day they are ordered out to battle, your soldiers may weep, those sitting up, the tears falling on their garments, and those lying down, letting the tears run down their cheeks.
Not because they are afraid, but because all have embraced the firm resolution to do or die.
Let them once be brought to bay, and they will display the courage of the heroes Chu or Kuei.
Chu was a contemporary and compatriot of Sun Tzu, who was employed by the king to assassinate a rival king by whom he was employed. Chu secreted a dagger, which he in the belly of a fish served up at a banquet. He succeeded in his attempt, but was immediately hacked to pieces by the king's bodyguard. This was in 515 B.C. The other, Kuei, performed his exploit 166 years earlier, in 681 B.C. His state had thrice been defeated by Qi, and was just about to conclude a treaty surrendering a large slice of his territory, when Kuei suddenly seized the Duke of Qi as he stood on the altar steps and held a dagger against his chest. None of the Duke's retainers dared to move a muscle, and Kuei proceeded to demand full restitution, declaring his country was being unjustly treated because she was a smaller and a weaker state. The Duke, in peril of his life, was obliged to consent, whereupon Kuei flung away his dagger and quietly resumed his place amid the terrified assemblage without having so much as changed color. As was to be expected, the Duke wanted afterwards to repudiate the bargain, But a wise old counselor pointed out to him the impolicy of breaking his word, and the upshot was that this bold stroke regained for Kuei the whole of what he had lost in 3 pitched battles.
The skillful tactician may be likened to a swift snake. Strike at its head, and you will be attacked by its tail. Strike at its tail, and you will be attacked by its head. Strike at its middle, and you will be attacked by head and tail both. Asked if an army can be made to imitate such a snake, I should answer yes. For the men of Wu and the men of Yue are enemies. Yet if they are crossing a river in the same boat and are caught by a storm, they will come to each other's assistance, just as the left hand helps the right.
If 2 enemies will help each other in a time of common peril, how much more should 2 parts of the same army, bound together as they are by every tie of interest and fellow feeling? Yet it is notorious that many a campaign has been ruined through lack of cooperation, especially in the case of allied armies.
Hence it is not enough to put one's trust in the tethering of horses and the burying of chariot wheels in the ground. The principle on which to manage an army is to set up one standard of courage which all must reach. How to make the best of both strong and weak? That is a question involving the proper use of ground.
Less reliable troops, if posted in strong positions, will hold out as long as better troops on more exposed terrain. The advantage of position neutralizes the inferiority in stamina and courage.
Thus the skillful general conducts his army just as though he were leading a single man, willy-nilly by the hand. It is the business of a general to be quiet, and thus ensures secrecy, upright and just, and thus maintain order. He must be able to mystify his officers and men by false reports and appearances, and thus keep them in total ignorance.
The troops must not be allowed to share your schemes in the beginning. They may only rejoice with you over their happy outcome. Pan Chao took the field with 25,000 men with the object of crushing Yarkand. The king of Yarkand replied by dispatching his chief commander to succor the place with an army totaling 50,000 men. Pan Chao summoned his to a council of war and said, "Our forces are now outnumbered and unable to make head against the enemy. The best plan, then, is for us to separate and disperse, each in a different direction. My deputy will march away by the easterly route, and I will then return myself towards the west. Let us wait until the evening drum has sounded, and then start." Pan Chao now secretly released the prisoners whom he had taken alive, and the king of Yarkand was thus informed of his plans. Much elated by the news, the latter set off at once at the head of 10,000 horsemen to bar Pan Chao's retreat in the west, while another part of his army rode eastward with 8,000 horses in order to intercept the second part of Pan Chao's army. As soon as Pan Chao knew that 2 portions of the enemy's army had gone, he called his divisions together, got them well in hand, and at the break of dawn hurled them against the largest detachment of the Yarkand army as it lay encamped. The barbarians, panic-stricken, fled in confusion and were closely pursued by Pan Chao. Over 5,000 heads were brought back as trophies, besides immense spoils of horses and cattle and valuables of every description. Yarkand then capitulating, and its forces were scattered. From that time forward, Pan Chao's prestige completely overawed the countries of the West.
By altering his arrangements and changing his plans, he keeps the enemy without definite knowledge. By shifting his camp and taking circuitous routes, he prevents the enemy from anticipating his purpose.
The axiom that war is based on deception does not apply only to your enemy. You must deceive even your own soldiers. Make them follow you, but without letting them know why.
At the critical moment, the leader of an army acts like one who has climbed up a height and then kicks away the ladder behind him. He carries his men deep into hostile territory before he shows his hand. He burns his boats and breaks his cooking pots. Like a shepherd driving a flock of sheep, he drives his men this way and that, and nothing knows whither he is going. To muster his host and bring it into danger? This may be termed the business of the general.
After mobilization, there should be no delay in aiming a blow at the enemy's heart.
Different measures suited to the 9 varieties of ground, the expediency of aggressive or defensive tactics, and the fundamental laws of human nature, these are things that must most certainly be studied. When invading hostile territory, the general principle is that penetrating deeply brings cohesion, penetrating but a short way means dispersion. When you leave your own country behind and take your army across neighborhood territory, you find yourself on critical ground. When there are means of communication on all 4 sides, the ground is one of intersecting highways. When you penetrate deeply into a country, it is serious ground. When you penetrate but a little way, it is facile ground. When you have the enemy's strongholds on your rear and narrow passes in front, it is hemmed-in ground. When there is no place of refuge at all, it is desperate ground. Therefore, it is on dispersive ground you should inspire the men with unity of purpose. On facile ground, see that there is close connection between all parts of the army.
This is both to guard against desertion of our own troops and against a sudden attack on the part of the enemy.
On contentious ground, hurry up the rear.
This is so that head and tail may both reach the goal at nearly the same time.
On open ground, keep a vigilant eye on defenses. On ground of intersecting highways, consolidate your alliances. On serious ground, try to ensure a continuous stream of supplies. On difficult ground, keep pushing on along the road. On hemmed-in ground, block any way of retreat.
This will make your soldiers fight with desperation. Cao Huan, who later became emperor, was surrounded by a great army. His own force was comparatively small, consisting only of 2,000 horses and something under 30,000 foot. The enemy had not drawn the lines of investment very closely together, leaving gaps at certain points. But Cao Huan, instead of trying to escape, actually made a shift to block all the remaining outlets himself by driving into them a number of oxen and donkeys roped together. As soon as his officers and men saw that there was nothing for it but to conquer or die, their spirits rose to an extraordinary pitch of exultation, and they charged with such desperate ferocity that the opposing ranks broke and crumbled under their onslaught.
On desperate ground, proclaim to the soldiers the hopelessness of flight to save their lives.
Burn your baggage and impedimenta. Throw away your stores and provisions, choke up the wells, destroy your cooking stoves, and make it plain to your men that they cannot survive, but must fight to the death. The only chance of life lies in giving up all hope of it.
For it is the soldier's disposition to offer an obstinate resistance when surrounded, to fight hard when he cannot help himself, and to obey promptly when he has fallen into danger.
The story of Pan Chao illustrates this point. When Pan Chao arrived at Shanshan, the king of the country received him at first with great politeness and respect. But shortly afterwards his behavior underwent a sudden change, and he became remiss and negligent. Pan Chao spoke about this to the officers of his suite. "Have you noticed," he said, "that the king's polite intentions are on the wane? This must signify that envoys have come from the northern barbarians, and that consequently he is in a state of indecision, not knowing with which side to throw in his lot." "That surely is the reason. The truly wise man, we are told, can perceive things before they have come to pass. How much more, then, those that are already manifest?" Thereupon he called one of the natives who had been assigned to his service and set a trap for him, saying, "Where are those envoys from the barbarians who arrived some day ago?" The man was so taken aback that between surprise and fear he presently blurted out the whole truth. Pan Chao, keeping his informant carefully under lock and key, then summoned a general gathering of his officers, 36 in all, and began drinking with them. When the wine had mounted into their heads a little, he tried to rouse their spirits still further by addressing them thus: "Gentlemen, here we are in the heart of an isolated region, anxious to achieve riches and honor by some great exploit. Now it happens that an ambassador from the barbarians arrived in this kingdom only a few days ago, and the result is that the respectful courtesy extended towards us by our royal host has disappeared. Should this envoy prevail upon him to seize our party and hand us over to the barbarians, our bones will become food for the wolves of the desert. What are we to do?"